Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us at another How to Do Research and Get Published webinar. Today, we're going to be focused on what it takes to get published in an academic journal, specifically focused on how to do quantitative methodology. To get started, I'd like to present you to our team. Jessica Offenberger is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She manages a range of science and medicine journals, working with editors and societies to develop new strategies and problem solve. During her time at Sage, she has worked closely with the author team to create and develop resources to help early career researchers better understand the publishing process and publish their research. Jessica has a background in project management, marketing, business development, and self-publishing. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from Michigan State University and is currently based in Los Angeles. Next, Simran Kaur is an associate managing editor in the Open Access Journals team. She works primarily on the oncology title Technology in Cancer Research and Treatment, and also on cancer control, where she is involved in manuscript processing and guiding journal strategy to support the growth and reach of her journals. Simran is involved in trialing new strategies and applications in OA, holds a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Science and a Master's of Science in Neurological Science and Translational Medicine. We're also joined by Brian Fogarty, who serves as an Associate Director of the Lucy Family Institute, specifically overseeing the Center for Social Science Research. He is also concurrent Associate Professor of the practice in the Department of Political Science. At the CSSR, he works with social science researchers to support their project research, design, data, and quantitative analysis needs. His current research focuses on the news media as a strategic actor in politics and understanding perceptions of voter and electoral fraud. Before joining Notre Dame, he was a lecturer in quantitative social science at the University of Glasgow's Q-STEP Center. Prior to Glasgow, he was an associate professor of political science at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. He received his PhD in political science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Next, Doina Gavrilov is an editor and reviewer at the Interdisciplinary Social Sciences Journal Collection, Common Ground Research Networks, and a reviewer at the Journal of Social Sciences, Science Publications, and the New Directions in the Humanities Journal Collection. She completed her PhD studies in political science, and her research interests are in the fields of European studies, political science, social policy, social theory, and psychology. In her academic career, she focuses on understanding human behavior with a special focus on the European lifestyle, showcased in her 2022 book titled The New Social Reality of the Europeans, a constructivist view over Europeanization. And last, I'm Sean Scarsbrick, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted resources to provide support at the appropriate time in the publication process. I have a BA in history from Manhattan College and an MA in history from Hunter College, and I am based out of New York. So today, as questions arise, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion today. The time constraints may not allow us to answer every one, but we'll follow up as appropriate after the call. If you see a question there that you particularly like, please feel free to like them or upvote them, and we'll start with those at the end of the call. And I'll pass it now over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Sean, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here today to chat about quantitative methodology. We're looking forward to a great webinar. So we start every webinar with this overview of the publishing process and how to write and how to conduct a quantitative methodology really ties into all of these steps because that really ties in with your published manuscript. So moving into our agenda, we're going to be covering a few things from the introduction to planning a quantitative study and writing a quantitative research, and then ending with the Q&A as Sean mentioned. So let's dive right in. Starting out, when you plan your quantitative methodology, as you're going through your data collection and outlining the process that you're going to take, you'll want to be thinking about the manuscript that you're ultimately going to be publishing. So you'll be planning that study with writing in mind. So really everything ties together, that the outline, the methodology that you plan on using, the data collection, the analysis, it ultimately all ties together into the manuscript that you're ultimately hoping to publish, and how your research is disseminated. So while they may not seem connected right at the very beginning, you'll want to be thinking about that holistic picture from the very start. And so you may not have a specific journal in mind that you're going to submit to, or maybe you do. Maybe you have that in mind already from day one, but you'll want to be thinking about that published manuscript, because that will help with how you end up structuring and collecting that data. So to get started, some people wait until they've conducted the research before thinking about what to write. What if we start thinking about writing from the very beginning and continue throughout the process, like I said? So to do so, we need to think about our process, what we learn, and what motivates us to move to the next stage of the study. How can I explain the research problem? Keep in mind your audience when thinking about how to explain your research question. Why is this question important, not only to you, but to your readers? This will help you in framing your question and couching it in the appropriate literature. Speaking of literature, why is this literature informative? Keep in mind what literature is most relevant to your research question. So we actually just did a webinar last year on how to write a literature review. So I encourage you to go back and watch that recording. And then why did I choose these questions and test these hypotheses? What makes your research question important? Consider how it builds on current lines of research and inquiry, and what the implications of your research are, both inside of academic and outside of academia. So really understanding why these variables are important, and how you can frame that. So as you go through and actually conduct a quantitative study, careful thought goes into each decision that we make. Why are these sources of data appropriate? If you collected your own data, be ready to explain how you did so and why you made the choices you did. Be meticulous here and be sure to explain your data collection process in the article, as well as any additional information in your appendix or maybe supplemental material. If you are using already developed databases, be ready to explain why you chose that data source versus others that are available. Be thoughtful about the limitations of these data sets and keep those in mind while considering what statistical models are appropriate. How did you select these statistical methods? When selecting a model, you should keep in mind the aim and objective of your study. What is it that you are truly trying to answer? The type of and distribution of your data, and the nature of the observations. So same as selecting data sources, you will need to justify the statistical modeling choices. To see what is standard in your field, be sure to read closely the data and method sections of the journal articles in your field. This is absolutely crucial, making sure that your methods section is clearly outlined and clearly describing all of this that we're talking about today. That's one of the biggest reasons for rejection that we see editors say. And so that's why we're talking about planning this study with writing in mind. Then you'll want to think about how you decided whether to accept or reject the hypothesis. For many standard regression models, you may rely on statistical significance as the main decision point to whether the hypothesis was rejected or accepted. So for example, the p-level for social sciences, the standard is usually 5%. Some additional thought should go into this, though, to better understand not only how to accept or reject null hypothesis, but that accept or reject, what does that mean for your study? Then you want to think how you can represent the results. Consider the different visual forms that may be best. For example, including tables, charts, and graphs, as well as other visuals like heat maps, can be very useful in displaying your results. Your main goal when thinking about representing your results should always be what makes the most sense and is clearest to the reader of your article, keeping in mind that many readers may not be statisticians or methodologists. You also want to highlight what you learned from the research experience. Whether or not you got the results that you wanted, there is something useful to learn from your research. If you did get the results that you expected, why did you? Consider what pushback you may get from peer reviewers and address those when applicable. And if you didn't get the results that you expected, think about what this means for your research question. While no results are not something research want, there is still much to learn from them, which should help you answer a similar research question in the future. And many journals are encouraging people to publish these null or negative results. And finally, be sure to always think about the limitations of your research and be clear what your results explain and don't explain. Really thinking about putting these results into context and what you learned will really help limit any bias that you might have and being open to the research that you just conducted as well as any future research. So as you're going forward, you're going to want to look for opportunities along the way. At each stage you encounter while planning and conducting quantitative study offers food for thought and material for papers, articles, cases, and others in academic writing. So what questions are you asking? How are you overcoming obstacles and working around dead ends? In other words, just as we were talking about, what are you learning from your process that might be of interest to other researchers? This can all be weaved into your data collection, how you're analyzing your results, and ultimately what goes into your final paper. And then we think about how are you actually going to capture the research process? Sometimes we are so busy doing research that documenting the process seems like one more thing to add to your plate. But time invested in writing along the way or outlining things along the way, just providing some highlights, will be incredibly beneficial when you have completed the study and realize that you have material from a variety of scholarly articles, informal blog posts, and presentations. So as you're going through this, think about what works for you and how you best look up information and how you best capture the information that's out there. Is it flipping through paper journals? Is it looking at a digital file, looking at institutional repositories? And make sure to look toward your library or your institution for these resources. They're a great tool. And even if you're an independent researcher, there's great ways to get access to the research that you need. With that in mind, be diligent with keeping notes on your study progress and what worked versus didn't, and outlining what worked well and what didn't. This will be helpful when responding to comments and critiques about your article, and sometimes this can be months or even longer after you've finished that research process. As we all know, you might spend months or years doing the actual research and data collection, and then by the time you get around to writing the paper, it could be quite a ways longer down the road. Consider using a reference management tool. We also did a webinar on this and how to organize and format your reference section. So tools like Zotero, EndNote, Mendeley to keep track of your literature and to keep notes in. These are all great tools to use. And then be meticulous in keeping notes when coding data. When you hit a snag, careful comments will help you understand where the code error may be. And keeping notes will help future you as well if you pick up a project you had not looked at for a period of time, like I said. Lastly, having well-documented and commented code will make it easy to reproduce or replicate your results. Some journals do require you to submit your data for replication, so this is very important for publishing your work. And some journals actually accept and encourage replication studies where authors are trying to replicate studies and data sets that are out there. So that's a goal of whatever it is that you're producing, make sure that it's reproducible or replicatable so that others can take whatever you're finding into their own practice or future studies. Doina, over to you.
So now, guys, we will be talking about data collection. We differentiate between two types of data collection, and we have the traditional way and the digital way. So in some domains, it may be easier and more natural to collect data by traditional ways, meaning field research that involves direct observation, experiments, and measurements. But in other domains, however, technology has changed the way we collect information, and it may not be necessary to go directly on the field and interact with the subjects. So you can address questionnaires online, on the emails, or even contact your subjects through a phone. It is more easier. It is easier for us. So starting from this, we differentiate two types of data collection methods. We have the primary data collection method, which is about observing or measuring directly the subjects of your research, and the secondary data collection methods, which are about using the existing data to answer the study questions. Now, depending on the study purpose and hypotheses and ideas, we will often be in the position of choosing between these types of data collection. So how do you make this choice? Well, it depends on your study. For example, a study focused on providing new tools for measuring something, or for proposing another theory, or even for bringing up new ways to measure something. In this case, you may use the secondary data, since the main focus of your study is not the empirical data itself, but the theoretical novelty you come with. But on the other side, a study using an existing theory, or which wants to provide some novelty, a new measurement system, or to highlight new factors that influence a process, or in this case, you may want to collect the information by yourself, to adapt the information to your study, to formulate the information and adapt it to your study specifically. The positive side of secondary data collection methods is that you can spare some time getting the data you need, but sometimes it may be harder to access this information. Now, one of the most common difficulties of the researchers at the beginning of their career is that they find it hard to keep up with the theoretical choice along with the paper and the research methodology. So in this case, we may be tempted at first to choose the research methods and collect our data, focusing on our ideas and forgetting about the theory. But for example, in the natural sciences, it may be a little bit natural and intuitive to go along with this type of research, because it is natural, because natural sciences are generally focused on measuring and experiments. But what do we do in the humanities, where words matter, where we interpret things? So here, guys, you may focus on the theory blocks. I mean, each theory has a way to define the reality, a way to discover this reality. It has certain methods and tools of research that it embraces. It may be very resistant to some methods of research. So you have to keep up with the theory, because if you do not keep up with the theory, at the end you may end up contradicting yourself. What is to do in this case is to keep up with your theory, to get informed, to see if the theory embraces the type of research you would like to follow. And in this case, for example, in the humanities, it is not so common for the researchers to use the quantitative research and most of researchers focus actually on statistics because it is difficult. It's a bit difficult to cope with the information they get. But I suggest not to limit yourself to statistics, because you can use various tools and you can measure processes in your own ways, define variables, analyze the impact of some processes. And the information you get when doing such a study is valuable because aside from doing this kind of study, you collect also information about quantitative research, which you can use after that to make another study about writing. You will write about the quantitative research differently from performing a study on a specific subject. So let's move now on writing about quantitative research, guys.
So when you're thinking about writing your study, there's 3 approaches that you could take. So the first approach being that you could zoom out and think about the process and the experience. So what was the purpose of the study and how did you plan it and how was it carried out? And you would aim to look at publishing that in a methods-focused journal, as that would be their predominant focus. Looking at then the second approach, if you're focusing on results and your findings, you'd want to aim to publish in a journal the most relevant specialities to your manuscript. So that's why a discipline-focused journal would be ideal. And then finally, when you want to discuss the wider impact of the study and what can be taken away overall, policy or practice-focused journals would be the best choice, as they focus on publishing policy and theoretical issues, concepts, and the actual semantics of research. Consequently, the same study could be adapted in different ways for different types of journals, obviously taking into account splitting and duplication issues, but by altering the perspective through which you're discussing and presenting your study, it could be suitable for readership in different ways. So I'm going to hand over now to Dawn and Brian for some tips and advice.
Thank you very much. So just had some tips and advice that relate to the previous slides, and some of this has been touched on already. The first is interpreting and discussing quantitative results is one of the most challenging things when you're writing a paper. A lot of times it's more art than science. It takes practice. So here are some of the best practices that I tell my students. First, start the discussion with the main finding that relates to your theory, right? Don't bury the headline. This was brought up. If possible, use figures and plots instead of tables. Everyone has their own preference, but that generally is the trend. People like it. Avoid avoid discussing your results as if you're going through a list of things to get done. As well as don't discuss all your results. So I know, so my background in political science and quantitative social science, a lot of times students, early career researchers, spend all this time learning the statistics and programming, and they want to tell you everything about it, and that's great, but just focus on the things that are important. This was, okay, so a second thing, this was already brought up, but every discipline as well as journal have different norms about how they want the data, methods, and results, how they want it to be organized, structured, and discussed. So within your own field, you might know this. If you don't, ask, say a faculty member or one of your colleagues. Journals have slight tweaks on this even within the same discipline. So as been suggested, look at sort of recent publications in a journal or outlet to see what is the norm there. You also have personal preferences, including from reviewers who say, I think you should do it like this. And you say, okay, I'll do it like that because I want to get published. Okay, a third thing is relating to the 3 ways to think about writing your quantitative study and potential outlets and stuff, is to think about your current research agenda how it fits in those different types of outlets, as well as where you want to be in 2 to 5 years. So that is your research agenda itself, but also related to your career goals. So you could be in a job right now, or looking to be in a job where only certain kind of publications sort of count for that place or that field. So just be wise about that, because it's very easy to start doing things and being like, oh, this doesn't count. It was fun, but it doesn't count for my career. So, okay. And then two other things, which is very common for quantitative research. A lot of times people, what they do is they create online appendices where they'll put all the sort of details about the data, the types of methods, additional analyses. This is done for various reasons. One is transparency. Another is just to save space in the main text of your paper, to address reviewer comments. It's sort of all sorts of reasons. So, for example, if you use survey data, you might include the questions in that online appendice, or you might do additional analyses which are not really part of your main text, but could be something related. And then lastly, this was also mentioned, but it's becoming increasingly common after you get a paper published to post your data, the code, and the code book for the data. Some journals require this. Some journals actually require data to be sort of validated, your results, before they publish it. But it's also best practice to do this, just so that you're being like completely transparent. You're not trying to sort of hide results and stuff like that. Obviously, if you're using restricted type of data, so like restricted access data, you can't publish it, but there's ways around it. You can still provide good information, such as, so I'm involved in a study where we have data about survey participants' web browsing behavior. So we can see like every single sort of track that they have. We can't make that public, but what we can do is create and share aggregate counts of the different web domains people have been to. And so that's sort of it from me in terms of tips. I don't know if there's others, Dorina?
I would like to advise you guys to be prepared to adapt, because you will never know when there's a pandemic or something that will mess up your data and your plans. So you have to adapt, to prepare a plan B if you can. So you prepare your study, or even, for example, you can plan your study very well, but in the end, you may end up not receiving the amount of data you need. And I saw a question in the chat about the sample size. And I will address this question if I'm allowed. In this context, I will say that sometimes you may not get the amount of data you need to prove your point if your study is empirically focused. So you will have to prepare either a plan B, or to rely on your secondary data collection to use already existing data to prove your point. Prepare to adapt, to improvise. Of course, it is great if you can plan from advance your study and be sure and take time for it to go well. But in case of a pandemic that nobody has seen for a lot of time, we cannot see this kind of things. So I would also like to add about the sample size, that in the humanities, guys, for example, we have this, it depends on the focus of your study. For example, if you have a study focused on an institution which has 30 employees, and you would like to know how these employees feel about the institution, the working code, or something like this, it may be enough for you to collect 50% of question, 50% of answers. I mean, 15, 16 questionnaires. And in most cases, 10 or 20 interviews more than enough in this case. But when we speak about studies on countries, you may need more data. The minimum amount of questionnaires, for example, is 100, since if you approach this kind of large amount of people, and you have to focus. But I advise you to research, to look up some studies, to see what is best for you, and you will find the right answer for you, I guess. Do you have something, guys, to add?
No, that sounds great.
I was going to say you covered it perfectly. Actually, that might be a great segue to dive into some of the Q&A. And so maybe I can start us off with, there was a question that came in about methods versus methodology. So just wanted to clarify that really quickly before we dive into some of these other questions. Methods refers specifically to specific techniques, procedures, or approaches used to collect and analyze data in a research study, detailing the practical steps taken to answer research questions or test hypotheses. Methodology, on the other hand, encompasses the theoretical framework and principles guiding the selection and application of these methods, providing a broader understanding of the philosophical underpinnings and rationale behind that chosen approach. So they are related, but definitely different. So if anyone want to add anything on that one for clarification before we dive into other questions?
I may say that when you speak about methodology, for example, you can look at the social paradigms, which are the greatest paradigms, and they come with all these ideas about collecting your information. And we have the positivism, which is focused on exactly collecting the information, measuring, nothing biased. You go there, you make your experiments, and they do not they do not embrace questionnaires, for example, guys, because questionnaires imply that people think, and depending on their state of mind and how they feel, they may change their answer. So for this reason, you may look at the theoretical methodology to see what these theories embrace. But to be easier, you can look for the newest theories, but which are not that, which do not have this kind of specificities in matter of methodology. Lots of new theories. For example, if we speak about the European integration theories, it is way simple. They do not speak about methods or nothing. They are just simple sets of ideas, theories they tested, and that's it. They offer it for you to interpret to use it in your study.
Absolutely. And I think that's another great segue into what distinguishes study hypothesis from research questions, and how we tie that all together. So study hypotheses are specific testable statements predicting the relationship between variables based on existing theories or logical reasoning. They're precise, predictive, and must be empirically tested, testable, and falsifiable. In contrast to that, research questions are broad inquiries into a topic or issue, guiding the overall direction of the research. So while those hypotheses make specific predictions, research questions explore relationships, phenomena, or factors without making specific forecasts. Sorry. So in some, hypotheses can be generated from those research questions. Anyone want to add anything on that?
No, that was excellent. I was going to do a version of that, which would have just been garbled. So that was perfect.
Well, thank you. There's another question that's come up. If you're doing research, can you reuse data that you used from a previous publication or study? I'm happy to jump in on that, but I want to give the group the opportunity to jump in if there's any thoughts.
Yeah, so you definitely can use the data. You just can't sort of publish the same thing. Like you can't. So, I mean, it's very common, especially if you are the one collecting the data. You spend a ton of time and often a ton of money collecting the data. It's not going to just be one study. It's going to be multiple, but you're looking at different aspects of the data that you collected.
I guess it also depends on the data you collect, because if it's general, you can use it several times in several studies, or use parts of it in other studies to prove your point. But if it is specifically in a very niche domain, so I guess you would like to collect other data in your study.
Absolutely. Another great question came through on that, like the hypothesis wasn't supported, and can the study still be published, or is it problematic to have a non-supported hypothesis? Assuming that I'm interpreting this question correctly, this could be related to null findings or negative findings. So, and many journals are accepting those type of studies. So it's important to disclose why that hypothesis wasn't supported. What were your findings? Share the data, analyze those results, and be transparent in whatever it is that happened or did not happen. And then understanding those limitations and any directions for future studies. Anything that the panel would like to add here to that, or correct?
Nothing to correct. It depends. I mean, if you have a study that is completely null, that might be an issue. but it also depends on how, like, it's also dependent on how you spin it, how you discuss it, how the sort of like, okay, we would expect to find X, but it turns out we don't. What does that mean for the field, right? Another idea in terms of planning a quantitative study is when you're planning it, think about, okay, if this doesn't work out, how do I explain it? Or what can I do to, go beyond it? So you're not just, doing all this work and then you're like, oh no. So there is some nuance involved with finding non-significant results or null findings.
I would like to add that in some cases, for example, when you do your study, when your hypothesis isn't supported, you may try to change a bit the approach and try the philosophical way. This proved to be this way. So why this is happening? As Brian said, often you may try to a contrario method to use to see. For example, I will see this hypothesis, but if it proves to be wrong, then we will also explore this type of idea or these ideas or these questions. So you may try from the very beginning to understand if it is a probability for your hypothesis not to be true or as you expected it to be, to explore also other explanations.
Thank you. I think that was really a good segue into the next question, if I can. So we're seeing some questions coming in about, we're saying about hypothesis, and there's the risk that your findings may not support your initial hypothesis. But as part of that, are there any tips that you would give to avoid bias when you're interpreting your results in order to, avoid proving a hypothesis that is not there?
I can start us off if definitely, but I think this is a great question for the panel. definitely interpreting results without bias is crucial for drawing those accurate conclusions. So a few tips: define clear objectives. So if you're thinking about clearly defining your research objectives and hypotheses before conducting the analysis, this will help you remain focused on the specific questions you want to answer, which reduces the chances of interpreting results in a biased manner. You'll want to use some anonymous analysis techniques. So if possible, conduct anonymous analysis where the individuals interpreting the results are unaware of certain information, such as maybe experimental conditions or participant demographics. This can help minimize unconscious biases. Consider alternative explanations. So when you're interpreting these results, consider other explanations. So avoid jumping to conclusions based on initial interpretations and explore different possibilities and interpretations. Go back, revisit. You can also use multiple perspectives. So if you have co-authors on the paper, get their input, seek input from colleagues or experts with diverse perspectives to gain insights and challenge your interpretations. So this could be your co-authors or others in your field. And yes, while the manuscript will be going through peer review, once you submit your manuscript for publication, it's better to think about this up front, because that methodology section, like I said, is one of the largest reasons for rejection. And then you want to think about statistical rigor. So I know that we could do a whole webinar on this, but you'll want to make sure that you understand any limitations of those statistical methods and avoid over-interpreting results or drawing conclusions that are not supported by data. So that's where outlining those limitations is really crucial. And then documenting that decision-making process. So we talked about keeping detailed records from the start. This includes how you are making those decisions, how you're collecting data, how you're analyzing it, and how you're interpreting it. So as you're documenting your rationale behind your interpretations, as you go back to review them later, this will help you better understand any potential biases that have crept in as you're continuing to analyze this data. Anyone from the panel want to add in? There's so many tips that we can talk about here.
I would like to say that literature review will also help you a bit, because since the very beginning of your study, if you understand that you have a certain position regarding the subject, I advise you to read the literature, the existing literature, if the domain is quite rich in information, and to focus especially on the studies you do not agree with. So you will have this general you will have your beliefs and you will have the proofs of other authors, and you will change a bit your position regarding the study, the subject. So you can try to do this.
I'll just briefly add, at least within social sciences, one tip about trying to make sure you're not writing where it seems like you have bias is to avoid using any like absolute words. Like all or definitely, something like that, because it's very rare we have a situation where we can, actually show causal relationships. But I'll also second what Jessica had said about showing your results to someone else, because when you're doing quantitative work, we're doing any research really, it's very easy to get lost in it and you miss the big picture. And so talking it out with someone or even doing a brief presentation forces you to get a different perspective on it. So yeah, that's it.
Oh, one other thing that I just thought of that might be worth mentioning. Look at those outliers and anomalies. So paying attention to outliers or anomalies in the data, and you can consider what impact that has on the results, if anything. So this is where keeping those detailed notes and understanding how you're collecting your data comes into play. but you can investigate whether this represents a genuine pattern or if it's due to an error or artifacts in the data collection process. So yeah, another thing that you could take a look at that might help.
Great, thank you all. Those are some really good tips. So now to jump into the next question, if I may, this is a question about the discussion section. Now, how do you know what results are actually the most important and worthy of presentation there?
So I think simply it's the results that most clearly tie to your theoretical discussion. I mean, that's what's driving it. And so, you know, in the best case scenario, you find some sort of support or something for your theoretical, your hypotheses, et cetera, and you can expand on it from that. If you don't, then what you could do is still start with it, but then pivot off of it to again, going back to the null findings to discuss like what, you know, we don't find there's a relationship. So what does this mean for what we would expect? That's my input on that.
I think also when we publish the study, if you choose to make your data available for everybody, you publish in the study what you consider to be important, but you leave a link to your data, and the readers and other scientists can access your information and choose for themselves if they need other information, other data you collected. So you can avoid a bit this dilemma of choosing what to put in the study and what not to.
Absolutely. I echo all of that. And just to add on, some key things that you'll want to put in the discussion section would be that relevance, like both of you talked about, significance, novelty, a little bit about the existing literature. So continue to discuss the results that support or challenge existing theories or literature out there, implications, limitations, audience considerations, and future directions. These are all some of the type of things that you'll want to include in your discussion section, depending on what your findings have been.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you all. That was very helpful. Another question that came through about questionnaires and how you interact with people. So how do you handle questionnaires when you later realize that participants did not answer every question? What do you do with those?
So
go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Jess. So
No.
yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean questionnaire. So if it's a survey, which, you know, if it's like a face-to-face interview, you'll know if they didn't answer, right? Because you're like, hey, you didn't answer this. But if it's a survey, that frequently happens. If it's something where like they just didn't answer a couple of questions, you know, because you allowed them to skip it, that just affects the number of observations you have for your analysis. But it could be that they answered, you know, questions that you are actually using, so it doesn't affect it, but, you know, they didn't answer other ones. But if they didn't answer, say they started a survey, answered, you know, maybe did like a quarter of it and then left for whatever reason, what I typically do is drop that observation from my data because it's not a complete observation.
Yeah, and just to add into that, there might be a reason there. I completely agree with that, Brian, but let's say there is a reason you do leave that in. It's important to disclose anything. So transparency is key. Disclose any missing data in the paper, like that might be a limitation, or that transparency to report the extent and handling of missing data in your research findings is key. So you can describe the methods used for handling missing data and any assumptions made during the analysis to think about also biases there. And just to continue to echo, was it random, right? Like, is it only a few questions that were missed, like one-off because it wasn't required and someone decided to skip that question? Determine if that missing data is systematic. Were they consistently unanswered by every single participant? Was it random? Try to think about why participants failed to answer certain questions. That goes back to interpretation of results and understanding biases. Could it be due to the wording of the question, sensitivity of the topic, or simply oversight? And then factor that into how you're addressing that in your section. And then also consider prevention strategies. So for this study, if you're doing more data collection, or for any future studies, think about strategies to minimize missing data like this in the future, such as pre-testing questionnaires for clarity, maybe providing clearer instructions, or using skip patterns to reduce that burden for respondents. So, sorry, anything else that the group wanted to add here?
I guess it also depends on how we formulate the questions, because the subjects of our study may feel a bit uncomfortable to answer some questions. So you may try to formulate them really good so they will feel comfortable to answer. And also you may use secondary questions, verification questions, that you can get your information from. If the participants skip some questions, you will have the secondary ones, so you will get your information from. But I guess it also depends on the data concentration. If you have the necessary information you have, you can skip these questionnaires. Or if you do not have the information you need, you may focus on the number of answers. We have this number of answers, but you also, in this kind of situation, you get an idea of how your participants feel about some subjects, and you have also other information except from the one you focused in the questionnaire.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I have a question here about translating content or translating your study from one location to another. So if the study is conducted in one context, so let's say it's very regional, it's country specific, how do you make it international? How do you globalize it? How do you make sense of it outside of its very local context? So yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this.
I would say extremely carefully. You don't want your study to be like, it only applies to this specific case under these conditions, right? So, but you also don't want to talk about it as if it could be the case anywhere else. So it's a very nuanced situation. And I personally tried to avoid sort of generalizing to other cases, unless I have to, because the editor said, please do, please speculate. So basically it's a speculation. So you could say, okay, I did the study, we might expect to find similar results, in a country with similar conditions or something like that. But it's a very sort of careful, nuanced response.
I will also like to add that it depends on what you're focusing in your study. If these aspects you're treating are important for a specific domain, for politics, for example, or gender studies, you will focus on these aspects important and the gaps in these areas. So you'll point out that, for example, this kind of size I approached in my study, and look what are the results. So we may look differently at this problem from our research area. But if your sample size is petite, then you may consider how to put this information in front of your colleagues and in front of the international audience.
Thank you both.
I just wanted to weigh in that I completely agree with this and want to echo everything that both of you have said. And if you do try to add this into more of an international audience. Again, like Brian said, go so lightly, go so with care, tread carefully, but you can identify some overarching themes or issues that go beyond the local context, or you can try to situate your findings within broader global trends or challenges or debates. So in this example, how your insights from your study on Morocco contribute to an understanding or addressing of global issues. You can draw comparison or contrast, engaging with the literature, what is currently published. So situating that, doing that literature review is going to be key. But again, thinking of, again, go so carefully, tread with care, so not to introduce bias. Focus on the data, focus on the facts, focus on your case, focus on those limitations, and then you can maybe think about some of those broader trends or what's in the literature and use some comparison and contrasting. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Jessica. I think we've got time for just one last quick question. And this is, I know we have a lot of people on the call who are studying. We have a lot of PhD students and other people who are in university on the call today. So in particular, is it mandatory to share data for an ongoing research project ahead of the PhD defense?
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
So this could be very like disciplines. So my general, I think the general norm is to share after something is done. So whether it's your PhD defense or a publication, but that could vary by field. It could vary by where you are globally. So the sort of norms, and it also depends on what do you mean by sharing? Do you mean sharing with anyone? Then I think what I just said applies. If it means you know, say your advisor or something like that, then it makes sense. It's like, yes, you probably want to share that data. Yeah.
I wanted to say that it depends also on the institution. Some universities may require you to present the information because some of the PhD students may consider it that, I don't know, 15 questionnaires is enough for their study to be presented, but it may not be enough. It's not enough. So they ask you to present the information to be sure to verify it, to see if it complies with ethics. And then they will encourage you to publish your study and to get in the final phases of your PhD presentation.
Fantastic, thank you. So now, first, a huge thank you to everybody who joined us today, all of our guests, all of our guest speakers. Before we wrap up, I want to flag some things that are upcoming from our end at Sage. So the How to Do Research and Get Published webinar series continues. Our next webinar will be on May 7th, and this one will be hosted live from the Center of Advanced Internet Studies in Germany. And this one will be all about how to conduct research in a digital world. So this may be of great relevance to a lot of you on the call today. Some others that are upcoming in June, we have one about writing and structuring your article's front matter. And then in July, one about how to get involved in a journal and develop your academic career. To flag as well, on the Sage Journal Author Gateway, excuse me, we have a dedicated space with all of the support resources. So you can learn more information about how to get published. You could see previous recordings to the webinar today previous recordings of other webinars like today's. You could learn about which version of your paper to share, where and when it can go. And then for anybody who reads or speaks Chinese, we have the Chinese Author Gateway as well with translated content. Additionally, to flag that I will follow up with everyone within a week with certificates of attendance for those who are joining us live, as well as links to the recording and links to some of the past ones, and also future registration pages too. So again, a huge thank you to Brian and Doina for joining us, and of course to Jessica and Simran for leading us today. And again, a huge thank you to everybody who joined us for the call, and we hope to see you very soon in a future webinar. Thank you very much and take care.